Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another stream. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another stream. Sorry, I just had my own Twitch open, and of course that fed back into my own stream. Sorry about that. I hope you're doing well today, wherever you may be, whatever time it is for you. Just past 9 p.m. here. I have something different in store for you today. The last few weeks since I've started my stream, we've been looking at data that is already available to us. Whether it's from IMDb, about movies, whether it's accident data or weather data, or any kind of data that we've been able to obtain that's publicly available. Of course, each company has their own data sets too, and we are not able to show that on the stream. Or I'm not able to show that, rather. But today I have something very different planned. Today I would like to show a little bit more about data collection. And maybe some of you are asking, well, how is it that this guy who's been explaining to us about data analysis the past 4 or 5 weeks has now suddenly switched to, oh, let's talk about how we collect data in the first place? Well, I'm doing that because I am a very broadly skilled person. So in the data world, I am covering sort of the entire spectrum, which is why I call myself a full stack analyst. It comes from the term full stack developer. I didn't coin the term, by the way, but it comes from full stack developers who can do both back-end and front-end, meaning they can manage databases, they understand database architecture, but they are also able to program in the front end, HTML, CSS, what have you. And yeah, so I want to talk about the other side, or one of the other sides of data, which actually is, for a lot of websites and a lot of companies, is the beginning of their data journey. And that is data collection in the front end. So on the website itself, in your product, whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to use the word website today to make it a little bit easier. But I'm referring to everything. I'm referring to e-commerce. I'm referring to standard content websites. I'm referring to the timetable you use to look up your trains. Anything that runs on the internet as a website, I'm referring to by saying website. Google Drive, Trello, it doesn't matter what it is. It is a website and you interact with it. And therefore we can measure something. And that's the beginning of our line of questioning, is why measure something in the first place? But I think we don't have enough time to cover that today. So what I've said I would go into today are some things about privacy, consent, and data collection. These are topics that are huge at the moment, huge in the analytics community and outside. There are a lot of people focused on these topics at the moment. Not only because of scandals, such as data leaks or breaches and things like that, but also just because of changes of privacy policies, like we've been seeing the last few weeks with WhatsApp, changing their privacy policy, causing a huge wave, or websites updating their terms and conditions, things like that. So privacy, consent, they go hand in hand, right? They're very related. And data collection, of course, follows those principles. So what I've listed here are some questions potentially to go into. Of course, this varies every stream. If somebody asks a question about something, we'll go into that more. And if someone's not interested in hearing about something, then we'll spend a little bit less time on that. And today's stream will probably be a little bit shorter than the others, but let's see how it goes. Of course, if we get a lot of attention about certain topics, then it may take longer than the other streams. But I think I would aim to finish around the 2-hour mark today. So what do we want to start with? What are we going to look at? Well, first I'd like to start out by saying that I'm not a lawyer. So this is like the disclaimer part. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a legal expert. I'm just telling you about my opinion, about what I've been doing the past 10 years. Sorry about the words sometimes in the music. That's something unavoidable sometimes. So, yeah, I'm just telling you about my opinion. And take that with a grain of salt. Of course, if you go to implement your own data collection or something like that, then please, by all means, do the research and get advice that you need to in order to decide things properly. But first, I'd like to ask the question, what is it? So it's actually not well formulated. So what is data collection? When we talk about data collection, what does it even mean? So today, I'm referring to data that is captured in the front end, so on a website, by either activity or inactivity. I suppose you could see it both ways. But data collection as a whole term, of course, applies to any kind of data being collected in any way, right? So that could be when you take a package out of your post box that some event or some data is sent to the post office telling them that you picked up your package, all kinds of different data sets. I'm talking today specifically about data collection on websites. And if there is something specifically you'd like me to address today, then do write it in the chat and we'll take a look at that. But I'm just going to do a little bit of exploration today. It's also a chance for me to do some exploration of what other people are doing in this space, what other websites are doing in this space, as opposed to our own, for the company I work for, which is a media company here in Switzerland. So it is I would say a good exercise to also see what else is out there. What are people doing? What are methods people use for data collection? So we are talking specifically about data collection on websites, which means we can also talk about what other types of data collection there are. So obviously I named one, which is any kind of sort of signals being sent from devices, so like IoT, right, Internet of Things. There's also data collection in the backend, so on a database, where you're writing information into the database as people use an application, for example. So they store rows and rows and rows of data. For example, every time someone logs in, so you log into your bank, they also store the activity to determine fraudulent behavior, for example, or they want to make sure that they can set a timeout on your session, or who knows, there's all kinds of reasons that data is collected in the first place. But yeah, basically there are, I would say, not infinite, but there are a lot of different types of data collection. And so we ask ourselves the question, how can we debug it? How can we see what kind of data is being collected? Maybe about us, or not necessarily about us, but about our activity on a website. Again, I'm only talking about a website today. If we wanted to debug other kinds of data collection, we would probably have to use different methods than I'm showing you today. So I'm just going to take a small drink here. So if we ask ourselves this question about debugging, how can we debug data? Then let's take a look at how we would do that. So let me show you an example. This is my browser. I'm going to explain a little bit about my setup first so that you can better understand how I'm looking at things. My browser is Google Chrome. Standard Chrome installation. It's not anything different than you would get if you installed Chrome and kept it up to date. I will be maybe using one extension today, but I'll mention that if I get to it. Basically everything that happens on a website, for the most part, is visible to you as an end user in what is called your client. If I had to summarize the client, I would say it's a combination of your browser information and your machine information. So we have the combination of the browser, which in my case is Chrome, and the combination of my machine, which is a MacBook Pro. That is what constitutes my client. Now there are a lot of different definitions you could probably come up with, but that is the definition that I'm going to use today. And when I refer to browser, I specifically refer to this particular browser instance. And that's very important, especially in analytical context, because if I open a new browser tab in here, then I have the same browser. But if I open a private window, for example, in private browsing, then I have another browser identity. And that's very important because we will come back to that later about sort of counting number of users or counting clients and things like that can get a little bit complicated. So how can we debug data collection? For that, maybe we need to first understand how data collection even works in the front end. So if you've never seen this before, then it will be the first time that you see this. Again, oh yeah, I forgot to mention, this is the dev tools of Chrome. So you can see that up here, dev tools. Basically, it just means that I click inspect, or I go to, I think it's view, developer, and then developer tools. The developer tools have some tools available to you to understand what is happening on a website. Developers use this to develop things. That's probably not the best term for it, but they use it to write code and adapt their code before it goes to the live website. And analysts like myself use it to debug things and find what kind of data is being sent or find problems with implementations and things like that. You have a few different things. The first thing you'll see here is this Elements tab. This is the parsed version of the website. So of course the website has like a source. That's the raw version, if you will. And now we have this parsed version, which is the version that's loaded for me. And that's very important because that version has loaded for me and me only. It could be that there are other versions loaded for other people that I don't see. But we don't know that, right? That's the point. There are a lot of reasons that you might want to do that, but one of the main reasons would be to test certain features, for example. But I digress a little bit. If we'd like to debug certain data collection, I have the DHL.com website open here. I thought this would be a decent example to look at. They're a very large company. Obviously here we can see that they have this DHL Worldwide site. And you can see every time I do something that it changes here in this window, right? That's because it's reloading the information here, the HTML. And if you understand anything about HTML, there's two parts. There's a head and a body within this HTML markup. So when we start debugging data collection, we look at a lot of different things that are happening. One of the things we look at is what cookies are being set. And there is a lot of information you can find online about what cookies are and how they work and what they're used for, etc. But I can tell you the basics is that cookies are used for storing information. That is the definition of what they are for. And the reason they are used for storing information is because when I navigate from this page to another page, I otherwise lose all the information that I was looking at. And so it's a way for you to carry information from one page to another page, which we call persistence. That is the reason that we do that. That's the reason cookies are set in the first place. It means that if you're logged into something, that you don't need to log in again every single page that you visit. You would stay logged in for every new page that you visit. So I'm just clicking around here, which is not so important right now, but basically that's to demonstrate the concept. And this is what I actually wanted to bring up. And that's great that it now popped up for me. I didn't realize it was going to do that, so that's great. Cookies are pieces of information. Now, for what that information is used is very, very different. It could be purely non-analytical, so it could be purely functional, which they have classified here. DHL has called these functional cookies. So these cookies, if the text is too small, I don't think I can make that a lot bigger. I can make it a little bit bigger here. These cookies allow the website to remember choices you make and provide enhanced, more personal features. For example, these cookies can be used to remember and store the last tracking number that you entered when using a tracking application. So here they give an example, which I think is great. They're telling you, oh, if you put in a tracking number, we'll remember it next time so that you don't have to type it again from scratch. Very convenient. So cookies are used to store information across pages, but also across sessions, which are basically, I visit the website, I decide I don't want to, I'm done, I've fulfilled my purpose of going to the website, I leave and I come back some other time, maybe a day later. And if I'm tracking my package, for example, I would track it today, see the status, and then say, oh, well, it's not here yet, I need to wait a few more days, and I come back maybe 1 or 2 days later, check the status again. That's what they're talking about here with these functional cookies. Now, because cookies store information, they can also be used for analytical purpose. That means we could store something in a cookie that we want to keep to identify people over time. And that is very often what is done with cookies. Not always, but that's very often the case with cookies that are being set. Now, how can I see what cookies have been set here? So you just have to believe me because you haven't seen my session beforehand. I've navigated to this DHL website, but I have not chosen anything prior to doing anything here. And I'm pretty sure that I now can't interact with the website anymore, which they've done deliberately because they'd like me to make a decision here. So that's I can sort of scroll up and down, but I can't interact with the site anymore. And the reason for that is they want me to take a decision so that I know what cookies I'm setting. And so let's take a look at what kind of cookies have been set already so that we understand how to actually set cookies. So in the application tab, and do let me know if this is too small to read. I did enhance the size of the console today. I had to actually Google how to do that. There is a storage section, and I'm going to get into these other storage as well momentarily, but there's this cookies. So you can see here actually that all of these cookies have been set, and you can see that they've been set with different properties. So these are the names of the cookies. The names themselves are sometimes not so relevant. They sometimes don't really tell you that much. What is interesting here is what has been set. So they've set some various cookies with some various identifiers, which I could not tell you what they do. I have no way of knowing what they do. They've all been set either on the domain of DHL itself or on the subdomain. So this would be relevant if they had multiple different domains like track.dhl or service.dhl or whatever they might have. But what's very interesting is I can see 2 cookies here. So DHL cookie consent which has a value of accepted, and cookie disclaimer, which has a value of seen. And this is very interesting because I actually haven't clicked anything yet. I mean, you'll have to take my word for it. But they have already put a value of accepted in this cookie consent, which is not so great, to be very honest with you, because I haven't clicked anything, so I technically haven't accepted anything. Now, they may be using this value for something else, so we can only estimate here what's happening. But if they would assume acceptance of something purely based on my navigation, that's a little bit dubious, right? And that's where the privacy argument and the consent arguments sort of start. And like I said, I'm not a lawyer, right? I'm not going to give you any legal advice. What I'm going to tell you is, from an ethical standpoint, I think we know that everybody has a right to privacy. Everybody has a right to decide. And so by writing this value in here, they may be taking away my decision. And that's, in my eyes, not the right thing to do. Now, what other properties do cookies have? So besides having a name and a value, which is usually the most interesting, they also have what's called an expiry. And this is very important. Cookies, like also baked goods, expire. The difference being that some of these cookies last significantly longer than your average baked cookie. So here we're looking at already, with this cookie disclaimer, we're looking at 2 years here. So 18th of January 2023, that's 2 years from now. Some of these cookies here are session-based, which means that when I close the website and I don't come back for a certain period of time, those cookies will automatically expire, which means they get deleted, which is very convenient. There's also another cookie up here called Optanon consent, which has a value of a huge string in it, which is very interesting. I can't really decipher that, to be honest with you. It looks like a sort of collection of different parameters, but yeah. So cookie values and cookie names, they can be pretty much anything. And as you can see here, some of these things are maybe for functional purposes, like they write here, strictly necessary cookies, in order to run the website. And other things could be in analytical nature. So for example, if they have some kind of ID that they're generating here, for example, I don't know, this one here, this ABCK, this might be an ID of some sort that they generate for me. And if I revisit the website later and this cookie is valid for 1 year, then if I haven't cleared my cookies, then it stays and it enables them to identify me again when I come back. So that's one of the methods used in analytics to re-identify people coming back to your website. And that maybe it's happened to you as well, that you've revisited a website that you've been on recently and they've shown you, hey, welcome back, or some similar message. So let's take a look at how these values change based on what I do. So let's take a look, and this should update in real time. Let's see what happens. So let's assuming that I accept performance cookies and functional cookies, but I don't accept analytical cookies for now. So I'm going to confirm this selection. So we've had 3 cookies added here: SCC, SFID, and SSQ. And there's one of these has a true value, which is session level. The other one is session level as well and has some encoded value in it. And this one is also an encoded value. So we don't know how to interpret this, right? And this is also behind the logic of DHL as well, is, we don't need to interpret. And what's interesting here is if I reload the page, you see how these cookies stay now. They stay with me. And you'll see actually there's a new cookie up here as well that I didn't notice before. So Optanon alert box closed, that seems to be this big black alert box that we had before. It actually has a timestamp of when we closed the alert box, which is a UTC timestamp because it's 1 hour behind. And we are UTC +1 in my time zone of 27, which was exactly 2 minutes ago, or 27:54, which is a minute ago. So that's very interesting that they're using cookies. It's not unexpected at all. It's totally expected. So that's one way of looking at what kind of data is being written about you or about your machine or your browser. But that's not definitive, right? We don't know what's being sent, and we'll come back to that, about what gets sent where, because obviously they want to collect this data somewhere. And we can also look at what's being sent. But there's a couple other ways that they can also be storing information. So one of the other ways is called session storage. Session storage is a way to, let's say it's an alternative method than cookies. And because of all the attacks, let's say on the principle of a cookie and where it's set and who it's set by, which I won't get into today, that's far too complicated for someone who's not deeply into the field of analytics. And so because of that, there's also this method of session storage, but it does expire. As it says in the name, it expires after the session, to my knowledge. I have never seen something to say otherwise. So it has limited use, right, for re-identification and something like that. On the other hand, local storage is a different story. So local storage is a alternative storage method to cookies that is stored in a different manner in the browser. And local storage is quite powerful because it has different, let's say, conditions than a cookie. So for example, local storage doesn't have expiry, which makes it a little bit tricky, right? Because we then have to kind of get rid of the data ourselves if we don't want it anymore. We can't say, oh, it should expire automatically in 1 year and then deletes itself like a cookie does. But local storage then allows us to write more or less, I would say, more information. I believe also longer values. I'm not 100% certain if that's true. Let's check that out so I don't tell you false information. I think there is a length. Maybe size. So yeah, this is what I was saying here. This local storage behaves more like persistent cookies in terms of expiration. So they don't die, right? This information doesn't get deleted unless you actually delete it. And this can be great, but it can also be somewhat detrimental because local storage cannot be read via server side. It can only be read via the client side. And that's something that I was talking about before, about this client. So everything that you see here happening is within your client. However, there is obviously all the stuff happening on the website's backend that you don't see. This is what we call, I mean, in terms of analytical tracking, we call this server side, but this is basically the backend of the website. So DHL's own build frameworks and how they actually have their website being generated, right? And what information is supplied to me. That's something that I don't see. And that's fine, but it means that they can't access information in local storage from the server side. They can't actually pick this information out without me seeing it. They need to go through my client and pick at this information and then somehow send it to the server. With cookies, that's possible to be extracted server side. It's a little bit more complicated to do, but it's definitely possible. So we've seen that there are two main methods to storing data in the front end, cookies and local storage. Now we understand that stuff is being stored there. Where is it sent? And where are they sending it to, and how are they sending it? Well, that's what we go to this network tab for. So let me just clear this so you can see what's happening here. This is all the information that was loaded when I loaded this page. I deliberately took a page that's a little bit smaller so that it's easier for you to see. And basically there's this waterfall diagram of assets that were loaded very quickly. And I can actually clear this entirely. Let me just refresh this completely. So I didn't preserve the log that time. So just to give you an understanding, here, right, in the beginning, this is 200 milliseconds. Your eye will not perceive anything under around, I believe, 19 milliseconds or something like that, or maybe it's shorter. So basically, something has already rendered from the website in the time that you haven't perceived it yet. So everything here is happening very, very fast. And then these are all the things that get loaded. And now everything for this page has been loaded. What kind of assets do we see here? Well, we see all the different things that make the website work. For example, the Facebook icon, which is probably somewhere in the footer. See, we do see down here. All kinds of interesting scripts and JSON files and all different types of things. If we wanted to better understand what type of things are being sent, what type of information is being sent about us, then we should be looking here in the network panel. The network panel determines what traffic is being sent from my client to this website, or any other website for that matter. If they've built in a script from something else and my data is sent there, let me show you what that means. So there are lots of scripts here. Let's pick one that looks suspicious. So this one, for example, app-measurement.min. This is coming from assets.adobedtm.com/extension/something. Now this script here is just a script. It's not doing anything yet in terms of sending data in this particular network call. It's just loading the script on the website. But DHL has chosen to load this script on their website for some purpose. Now, knowing what this is, because I work in the field, this is Adobe DTM, which is it's one of their instruments they use to decide what gets tracked and what doesn't get tracked on the website. And I'm gonna come to figuring out what gets sent and stuff like that, but I'm just gonna show you basically where you would see this happening. Just to be very clear, I haven't looked at DHL's site before, so this is gonna be the first time for me also debugging it. And it's just to show you that once you understand the principle of data collection, once you understand how that works in the front end, you can go to any website and apply the same principles, right? So one thing we're going to look for is how they're kind of sending data to their collection endpoint, right? And there are different analytics tools that exist. I'm definitely going to go into that in a moment, but I'm just going to show you where this occurs. Basically, this occurs in the network. So if I click something, let's say I'm going to go all the way down here in the network. I'm going to just clear this. So if I interact with something, at some point I will trigger something. So you see here, I triggered a page, and some stuff was happening, right? So there was some information being sent, and in one of these network requests that was sent before I loaded the next page, we actually had what's called a click event. And that is what we saw if we would load the page in a new tab. So let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to click this one in new tab. Nothing happened, you see? No recording. No activity here. But if I open this in a new tab, why is it not letting me do this? That's interesting. Maybe we have to use something else. So it's not letting me open it in a new tab here. Well, sort of right click. But that doesn't really matter so much. Basically what I can see here is that there are some things being sent before I reach the next page. And if I look at these things, I can determine what they are. So this here, for example, if I look at the types, I can see, this is a script. This was text, but it was a redirect to something else. And this was a GIF. Let me just skip this a second. So if you've ever heard of a GIF, and no, I will not say GIF, I won't debate this with you, by the way. If you've ever heard of a GIF, you know that it's an image type. But very common in web analytics tools is to use a image to transport information to an endpoint. So in this particular scenario, they're using a GIF, which is very common. The GIF itself is only 1 by 1 pixel. So you actually don't see it. It's on this page, but it's hidden. So you don't see it. But on that, piggybacked, if you will, on that image, with that request, so this GET request, there is all this information transported via what's called a query string. If you've ever seen a query string in the URL, it looks like this. So let's say, I don't know, category equals Maddie, for example. These query strings allow you to append information onto a URL to do specific behavior, but in analytics we actually use them to append information onto a request to get more information from that request. And you see here that all of these query parameters have been tacked onto the URL. The whole image request itself looks like this. It's huge. And these are all the things that were on that request. So there's this path, which is very large, and these are all the query parameters that are on it. So you have, we have all these different parameters, and all of these different parameters do something different. They are something unique for the analytics tool. In this case, it's Adobe launch, at least, which is doing the collection, and then these things are being collected for some analytics tool. Could be Adobe Analytics, not sure in this case, but it doesn't really matter so much for the purposes of today. Basically, they're collecting this information, and if you look, you can see there's like things like timestamps, there's maybe some IDs in there, there's names of pages, there are maybe some technical things in there, there's also something like US dollar for a currency. There's all kinds of things you can pack into here, right? And these things, I would say, are dependent upon what type of data they want to collect, right? So sometimes they want to collect as much as possible. Sometimes they only want to collect specific things. And that's for obviously the team to determine. So we got a little bit ahead of ourselves in terms of data collection, but I just wanted to show you where this is happening. So in the network tab is where we're going to see all of this happening. If we were to go to a different website, we would see the same thing. Let's look at a different website. I'm just going to type something in Google, like presents for 2021. And then, I don't know, I'll just visit one site here. I'm just coming up with this right now. Alright, so this site obviously is loading lots of ads and all kinds of information. And on this site, I would be able to do the same thing. I would be able to look for these scripts being loaded and these requests sending data for analytical purposes. And now you may be asking the question, how do you even find these in the first place? Well, if you want to know which they are using, the easiest way is to go to your sources. This is very interesting. Is to go to the sources tab and look for what types of services you see here. So this is a huge one. They've got a lot of stuff on here. But I can see that they, for example, have Google Analytics, which is a very, very common analytics tool that people use. So I know that they use Google Analytics, and what I can do is I can check what kind of information Google Analytics uses. I can see that in the sources here because that's the information that gets sent to Google Analytics. So I know it's called something 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 slash collect. So that's great. I can go to my network and I can just search for collect. And now here I see these requests that go to Google. And like I said before, these GIF requests, right? I can check out these GIFs and I can do the same thing. I can look here at what information is being said here. So if you remember a few seconds ago when this pop-up came up and I closed it, this is actually what they've collected here. You can see here this daily newsletter pop-up, click, close button. They've obviously decided to collect information about that. There's some information here about, I don't know, accounts or timestamps or anything like that, IDs, and they've also collected some information about the site itself. So I'm in gadgets innovation category inside interesting engineering. So maybe they have a roll-up site or something like that with different websites in it. Who knows what they're doing? But you're able to see a little bit about what kind of data is being collected, which is very, very interesting if you're looking to understand what kind of data is being collected about you. This is one really, really helpful way of seeing that. So, what if I want to see other information that's being written about me? Well, you don't have to only look at the analytics tools. You could also look at things being written about the behavior that you're doing. So one way that we can write information about what is happening, we don't have to send everything with the network request, right? We can actually save some things locally, like we saw within the cookies. If we go back to the application view here, so we can look at the cookies here, and you can see there's a lot more cookies being sent here. And if you'll notice the URLs this time, they're a little bit different. And there's a reason for that. The reason is that this website, interestingengineering.com, is setting cookies here. But these websites are also trying to set cookies on my machine. That's why they're being listed here. However, they're not able to do that because of a policy which prevents cookies being set on another domain, which is what's called third-party cookies, by the way. But that's a little bit too advanced to discover in this session. But if I wanted to look at various cookies here, I would be able to open them, and I could see here I could see, for example, the different domains. So like here, this Facebook cookie has been set on the .facebook.com domain. You see it's not set within, it hasn't been set on this domain, on interestingengineering.com. So this is one way of storing data. The other way we have storing data, besides local storage and the cookies, is, oh, some errors here, is a JavaScript object. So for programmers out there, they'll be familiar with this. But basically there are JavaScript objects. JavaScript objects you can just imagine as pairs of keys and values, much like we saw in the cookies. They have a name and a value. And we have the same thing here. We have a JavaScript object that has different kind of sub-objects within it. And you can see here that there's a key and a value. Now, some of this information will be sent to an analytics tool, for example, but not necessarily all of it. It could be that some of it is sent to the same tool, but more often than not, all of this information is sent to different tools. And the reason that we write this information in a JavaScript object is because it collects it in one place. And this concept is called the data layer. The data layer is something that's very, very common. You can see that there's some issues here on this website, but that's not really what I'm trying to show. I'm just trying to show this about the data layer. And you can see that actually some tools like Google's Tag Manager, for example, which I won't go into too much detail about what that is here, but I'll come back to that in a moment. Some tools like Google Tag Manager actually write a lot more information into the data layer itself. But the reason for using the data layer is essentially to have a storage that is fully controlled by you, that isn't in cookies, that allows you to have a certain format that you want. And it's very, very convenient to use that. So pretty much every website that has an analytics installation should also have some kind of data layer. Now, what are we seeing here with these sort of GTM things? This is basically coming from the website has a way to instruct what data is sent when. So basically, when I click something, as we saw before with the pop-up, when I click something, it should say when to send information to an analytics tool, for example. And the way that it does that is by basically listening for what you do. So you see here, if I click in this text here, it's triggering these requests. We can see this Yandex, for example, is sending data. If we scroll down here, we can see more data being loaded. These are all different tools that are sending information for whatever purpose it is, right? We can't really know what all these tools do just like that. But we can basically say that there's tools that are listening to what activity you're doing on the page, and they are sending data based on the activity that you take on the page. Now, coming back to sort of this privacy consent discussion before, it can be under consent that all of this is being collected for what I'm doing here, right? It could be also the case that they are collecting all this information about what's happening, but none of it is personal. None of it is about me as a user, as a person. And that's totally fine too. But I should maybe have the option to say, I don't want to have this data collected about me. And that's what they should be giving me here as an option, but I don't see that so easily. There probably is a way to do it. So if I go here, maybe terms of service, there might be something here about opt-out or analytics or something like that. Maybe we can search. So I don't see anything about that here. Maybe it's in the policies rather than terms of service. Here we go. So there is a privacy policy. Here we go. So this is their policy, and basically by using their website, I agree to it, right? That's what they're saying. So they use Google Analytics, Yandex, Metrica. They have for information how it's used. I should look at those specific policies, and that's what they've basically said here, is that that's what they're doing in terms of analysis. So they say here, this is more specific about that. We may use cookies, log files, clear GIFs, that's what I was talking about before, so a GIF that's basically 1 by 1 pixel, and or similar devices to identify you, keep track of the user's interactions with the website, and to enhance certain activities available on the website, etc. So basically they are they're telling me if I want to not do that, if I don't want to be tracked, I can reject websites. I can reject parts of the website by rejecting cookies, for example. And they're writing here about these third-party advertisers, which we saw in the sources about how many third parties are here running on their website. But basically, they have decided to include them. That's the most important takeaway here, is that they, on Interesting Engineering, they have decided to include scripts from those services. And the way that they do that is, generally speaking, either by hard coding it into the page or by running something like a tag management solution, which, so in this case, they're using something called Google Tag Manager. Google Tag Manager is basically a way to integrate code onto a website. So let's see if there's an overview here. There's a PDF and stuff that you can read. But basically, it allows you to inject code by loading one piece of code in the beginning, in the head of the page. So if we looked into the head, they should have it in the head, by the way. I don't know if they do. See all the other stuff in the head. Oh, here we go. Yeah, DNS prefetch, but there should be a tag manager link. Here we go. So script async googletagmanager.com gtm.js. This is their JavaScript that instructs the page basically what to do, right? So if I click here, if I open popular stories, all that kind of stuff, that script is instructing the browser what to do. Sorry about the... So essentially, there's a lot of different ways to instruct the browser what to do, but in most scenarios, there's a reason to instruct it to do a certain thing. So for example, yeah, I definitely need to not get banned. So for example, if I am clicking in here, they've instructed the browser to obviously send data when I do this click, or there's certain reasons why they've instructed the browser to do that. I mean, we can only but assume why they have decided to do that, right? So let's maybe go to a different website. Let's go to New York Times. Just because I think there should be less ads or less intrusive ads, let's put it that way. So if I go to sources again, I can see where they are loading content from. So again, I can look at what kind of services they're using. So you see you have Google Tag Manager, Google Analytics, Chartbeat. These are tools that you will see if you look into the analytics space. You'll see there are lots of different types of analytics tools available for different purposes. So that's what I was saying before about like what analytics tools exist. That's basically, depending on what you want to do, different analytics tools exist. So for example, Chartbeat has a feature that when it sends data, I don't know if we can see that. So there's this chartbeat.js which loads, and then every so often it pings the page. And so the listener in the background is a sort of like passive listener that will continue to send data. So if I continue to click around here, it actually sends information to Chartbeat. I don't know if it does it all the time, but it will continue to ping. And the pings are used to actually determine how many people are active on the website in real time. Now other tools do the same. Google Analytics, for example, does the same thing. But analytics tools basically have different purposes. That's what I'm trying to explain here. So how do these send data? Basically, if we are looking at the last question we wanted to look at today, actually, we wanted to look at, okay, how is this data being sent? We can see here again that they're using this query string parameters. So they're attaching this on to the image. Again, Chartbeat is using this GIF approach, right? They load an image basically on the page with all of these query parameters attached to it, and that's how that data gets to Chartbeat, right? Because it makes a request to Chartbeat with this image request, and on their side, they take that data and they split it out. And they split it based on these query parameters. And we can see here again, there's all these different query strings. So for example, G0 is called national desk, G1, no author. So there's like no author on this article, for example. If I went to a different article, I might find one that has an author on it. Let's see if they also have a kind of data layer. Now, if I didn't know what they're using, I would probably have to spend some time trying to figure out what data layer they're using. But because I know they're using Google Tag Manager, I know the name of the data layer object, right? So I can see here all the information in the data layer, and the stuff in the beginning is the stuff that they are putting in from the beginning, or the stuff at the top of the data layer object is the stuff that's there from the beginning. I'm just going to forward skip the music again, sorry. And so we can see here that there's like these nested objects, and here we can see there's all kinds of, there's an object called A/B test, and then within this there's all different types of tests. And it's very interesting because here we can actually discover something I mentioned in the beginning, that analytics is often used for testing different versions of a website to determine which one is better, to make the website better, right? We can see that in one of these tests I'm in a control, in another I'm in a show, and they all have different values, right? So in this one, for example, in this test, I am in the economy menu version. So test name and then the variant. And this is very, very interesting because this allows them to, on a very granular level, determine which tests work best, and even to create better versions of their product or their website. And there's all these events here. Some of them look very interesting. For example, this impression event has some information attached to it. So there's an impression, and there's some context and a label and some name, and this doesn't say anything to me, but to them, this may be something valuable that they've decided to collect, right? And again, not only looking at Chartbee, we could look at the Google Analytics request, for example. So we can see here this GIF request. We could see again what kind of information they're collecting through these query parameters. And so, yeah, this is you're able to do this on any website. You're able to see what type of data is being collected, either if it's about you or your behavior. Do have a look. Do it yourself. Go to a website and have a look about what kind of data is being collected. And if you want to know more, write them an email and ask them. Say, you know, what types of information are you collecting? What kind of analysis are you doing? If you're really interested to know, I think it's very interesting to know what kind of data can be used for what type of purposes, right? Because the last streams we were looking at data sets that we already had, right? But it would be great if we could work with a real event-based data set. So I've been looking the last few weeks if I could find one that's interesting enough to be able to show you. I obviously can't show you the one from my own company, but maybe we can obtain a kind of event data set that we could have a look at something like this, and not just a sample one, but really like a realistic one, that it would be interesting to look at that and see why this data is being collected in the first place. Why are we trying to figure out who clicks on this article and who clicks on this article? And there's a lot of different reasons why, but it comes down to basically improving this website. That's the number one reason that we want to collect that data, at least from my analytics point of view. So today's been a little bit of a different stream. Austin Giovanelli, how are you doing? How to hack? So I don't understand your question exactly. What hacking are you referring to? How do you do a hack? Okay, but what are you trying to hack exactly? Are you trying to change the data collection, or what's the goal exactly? Just anything that gets in my way. So I'm not entirely sure what you mean. I mean, you can only control anything that's in the client here. You're not able to control things that happen on the website itself from your client, other than making requests, obviously, to the website with other types of tools that would allow you to, cause damage potentially, or investigate their systems. Here, what I'm showing is basically how to investigate what kind of data is being collected and when. But not how to change things. But you can most certainly make a request to the website with, Twitch equals Matty2shoes, and this will show up in their reports. Do you think you can hire me? I know HTML language. So I'm not looking to hire anyone at the moment, personally. So I'm not sure what I would hire you for, to be honest. If I was hiring someone, I might consider it, of course, depending what I was hiring for and what your qualifications are. Do you know the Bootstrap? So I'm familiar with Bootstrap. If you can tell me what you're referring to, are you referring to JavaScript? So basically here, we've been having so the framework named the Bootstrap. Yeah, it's the Bootstrap framework, yes. I'm familiar with it, yes. This one, right? It's very, very common, yeah. Definitely. Yeah, this is a great way. You can install it very quickly with Node.js, and you can get something running very fast, absolutely. So we could also debug this website, for example. So let me show you. So we go to getbootstrap.com. Let's see what kind of information they're collecting about us, right? Oh wow, so this is very, very slim. We can see very, very slim request lists, so not even a full page worth. What sources are they using? Okay, so we have some stuff left over from the New York Times. They use Google Analytics, we can see that, analytics.js. They run some ads using Carbon. They also run some other ads, but that might be from before. And in the network request, we can see analytics.js, and we can see that collect call here. That's the one for Google Analytics. So they are sending some information here about this page view. We can see this information, right? We can see, I don't know, some identifiers and stuff, but there isn't a lot of information to go on in this scenario, right? There's not a lot to see here. And we can see, like, for example, there's no classic tag manager, at least from what I'm seeing. So we wouldn't probably find a data layer object, for example. We don't see that here either. So that is, that's definitely very different installation from what we were looking at before, right? This is a much, much smaller and slimmer installation of what you can do with analytics tools. So yeah, today was a little bit of a different stream. We were looking at the last few streams. We were looking at working with data that we'd already collected. And as I was explaining before, it would be very interesting to get a data set that we could work with that has events in it. So we've been seeing here with these like click events, for example. So if I open these things, I could have my software send some click events, for example. I don't know, if I went to a different website, they might have click events enabled. They obviously don't have that here. So Austin asks, which database is best? That really depends on the use case. I mean, there are lots of different types of databases for different purposes. There's, classics like MySQL or Microsoft SQL Server, or Postgres, which have been around for a long time. But there's also new databases like Snowflake or Amazon Redshift, or Google BigQuery. Microsoft is my enemy. Why are they your enemy? I mean, there's Azure Cloud as well. I mean, there's all different types of databases you can choose for different types of purposes. Cost too much. Well, I mean, everything costs money, with the exception of open source. You're right. Open source like MySQL or Postgres, they can be run. I mean, you're not paying any licensing fees, but you will pay to host the database and the running costs, the operation costs of the database. So it's not completely free, of course, but it does not cost a lot to run MySQL or a Postgres database. Of course not. Yeah. I'd be running MariaDB on my Raspberry Pi. Yeah, exactly. You can run something on something like a small computer like a Raspberry Pi. I mean, it probably won't be very performant at some point, but if you're doing something very, very small, like turning lights on and off, or a small robot or something like that, that's usually sufficient, absolutely. So yeah, today has been somewhat of a shorter stream. I wanted to just also show the process behind collecting data as well. The data we've been looking at, like we were looking at this IMDb data set, right? Last time about the movies. Of course, IMDb also has a data set about how people use their website. That's not what they provided in this data export, right? They were providing a list of all their content, not of how people use their website. Because the way that people use the website, that is proprietary to them. That's their product, and so it's their right to keep that data for themselves. Of course, it would be great if we could find some cool aggregate data or time series data from some big websites, but I think it's very unlikely that they will be sharing that. Most of the time I am looking on websites like Kaggle to look at data sets, because these are actually public data sets, and so you can actually look at what type of data is available to be able to play with. And one of the things I was looking for the past few weeks was these behavioral data that I'm talking about with these events in it. But of course, it's quite tricky to find that kind of data. So maybe we can look at, I don't know, if we look for something specific like Google Analytics, we could find something like a sample Google Analytics. So here, for example, retail data analytics data set, which has some information in it about like sales numbers. Let's see, there's some sales numbers here. Store, department, date, weekly sales, his holiday, etc. But I don't find this so interesting because it's kind of already engineered. I would like to have the raw data set available so that we could do whatever we want to with it, right? So maybe I will need to search a little bit more in the future to actually see what we're going to look at next. Opinions on privacy, says Austin. Yeah, I for sure have opinions on privacy. It's something we touched on a little bit earlier in the stream. If you had not joined at that point, that's fine. Essentially, my opinion about privacy is that every company has to decide for themselves how they want to track. So if we go back to the original case about the first website we looked at with DHL, every company needs to decide for themselves how they want to implement tracking and instrument it on the website. Because in the end, it's up to them to decide what is right for their business. Of course, they need to still give the users a decision power, that they can make a decision. In some cases, some tracking can be determined as kind of necessary, or some functions can be determined as necessary. For example, if you need to log in somewhere, then they need to identify you, because otherwise you can't log in. But they could also say that you are logging in so that they can identify you, but they don't use that for analytical purposes. That's totally possible. And I think that's something that each company needs to decide for themselves, but I don't think that the decision should be taken away from the end user. That is, I would say, how my opinion is. And I think that there is an ethical line, for sure, about what is right or what is wrong, but there's a big gray area in between. I mean, we've seen that with these cookie banners. If I were to clear all my data now, from here, so we're going to clear everything from DHL, and we're going to force reload the page. So they have this banner here about their cookies, and there's like this privacy notice and stuff, and I have this cookie setting option, and you see here that they are giving me a lot of information about the cookies that they are using. That's just concerning cookies, but they are giving me like a choice in the matter. And they even have some cookies here that are considered strictly necessary. They are actually classifying things like Adobe DTM, they are classifying it as necessary. That's within this strictly necessary category. And maybe they are doing that for a certain reason. Maybe they are doing that because they use this for an analytical function, which is then a feature on the website. Could be, right? And then it's not in our kind of end users' power to say that's right or wrong, right? Every company needs to decide that for themselves. But the fact that they are giving me this chance to make a decision, and that the decision is transparent, I think that's a lot of plus points. And you can go here into the analytics cookies, and you can see exactly what type of cookies they are using. For example, these first-party ones, so they have DHL.com. There's like this name of this cookie is a pattern type cookie with Adobe Marketing Cloud, Google Analytics cookie. You can really see everything here. There's all the descriptions and everything. And I think that's really cool, to be honest. I think that's very, very forward thinking. Yeah. What about your opinion, Austin? Do you have an opinion on privacy? Do you think what they're doing here is pretty good? I think it's quite good, yeah. So yeah, looking forward to the next few streams. So I hate the cookie banners, says Austin. Yeah, I agree with you that there's probably a better approach. But for now, they're probably the best option. Yeah, probably. I mean, there's a lot of solutions that are being talked about, sort of like is logged in, for example, if you've heard of that. So there's this sort of is logged in specification, like a web authentication API, which becomes global. That is like a shared resource to determine if a user is actually authenticated to the website or not. That would be one way to bypass that in some contexts. I mean, that's what Google has been doing with, the Google login, or Apple has been doing with the Apple ID, or Microsoft does with their, whatever their ID is called. I think it's called Microsoft Online or something like that. That's basically what they're kind of doing. But yeah, there's some information about that here. This was last year. Yeah, so John Willander, which is one of the proponents at Apple who writes specifications for like ITP, for intelligent tracking prevention, for example, from Apple, that they actually have this proposal. Oh yeah, it's been moved now. Didn't realize that. So would be an API that allows websites to inform about the user's login state, which I think is very, very cool. But yeah, it's something that would have to be adopted at a huge scale, and of course this would take a very long time. Yeah, and I mean that's something very interesting. But looking forward to the next few streams, I think we'll probably go back to some more data analysis topics, unless anyone has like a specific desire to see more about data collection practices, or maybe about configuring things like Google Tag Manager or things like that. I mean, on my own website, on let's see here, mandytwoshoes.com, on my own website, I don't run any analytics actually. Not because I don't want to know, but because I just decided not to run it. Austin, thanks for the stream today. Yeah, you're welcome. I hope you enjoyed it. I think next time I will probably go back to these more data analytics tasks, like looking at some data sets. I have some interesting questions still about some of the data that we've looked at in the past, like the movies data set. I don't think we finished with that. Also some data that we downloaded for the accidents stream that we did a few weeks ago about road accidents. There's some data there about streets and about weather, which we didn't go into too much detail about at all, which we didn't use yet. So that would be really cool. But for now, I would say we will leave that the way it is today. And of course, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me on Twitch or on LinkedIn or via my website with questions. There's a suggestion box as well on my stream. If you're interested in making some suggestions for the stream, topics or method, both are totally fine. And I hope you have a great rest of the evening or rest of your day or start to the morning, whatever time it is for you. And see you next time. Thanks.